ABC Radio Central Coast 1 for those who like Halloween. Warren Zevon's Werewolves of London. I wonder if there'll be any little werewolves roaming the streets today. It's 7:15. Great to have your company. As I was saying, for a lot of people this time in the morning, they would be disrobing and having a morning shower. For many of us, probably it's only twice a day we get naked, which is fair enough. I don't think we're that comfortable as a society with being naked, but what about being forced to strip in front of people you don't know? It could be a traumatising experience. You may have heard Dom Vukovic's story on our local news. This is what he had to say about statistics that the ABC had to crowbar out of the government when it came to the numbers of strip searches. And sadly, the Central Coast is overrepresented again. It seems as if we always end up being at the wrong end of statistics. There are more people strip search at Gosford Railway Station than any other regional station in New South Wales. And if you add on Wyong Railway Station and other local railway stations, it's only Central Station where there have been more strip searches, according to the Freedom of Information that we were able to access, GIPA request they call it, that we were able to access.
New South Wales Police has responded to a request for data on the number of strip searches that have occurred at all Transport for New South Wales train stations for the financial years ending in 2017, 2018 and 2019. During the 3 years, Sydney's Central Station had the highest number of strip searches, with 22 people dealt with by police officers. In the Hunter and Central Coast, Gosford had the highest number, with 12 people strip searched in the 3 years. 4 people were searched at the Broadmeadows railway station, and the same number were searched at Wyong. In total, there were 29 strip searches at Hunter and Central Coast railway stations dating back to 2016.
And when that story went to air, I think most people listening to it would sort of raise an eyebrow and say, what are my rights in regards to that? What if I don't want to be strip searched? If I haven't had a shave this week and I look a bit raggedy, which is often the case with me. Can I say, look, could we get my GP and maybe my lawyer and we can go up to the station if you've got a charge and we can, if you really want to charge me with something, I haven't done anything wrong. That's the sort of how I was thinking, but would that wash? Would they be able to hold me down and rip my dacks off? I don't know what the law is. Our next guest does. His name is Manny Conditsis. He's a senior trial advocate and a specialist in criminal law, and is here to educate us on our rights, and more importantly, I think, Manny, the rights of our children who might be targeted in this, for many, highly traumatising police procedure. Good morning.
Good morning, Scott. Good to be with you.
I think for your good police too, and there's so many great police people, it must be really traumatising for them. They don't want to be poking around people, their naked bodies. I know so many police people who would hate to do that, would find that abhorrent. How do we spare everyone the trauma?
Well, I guess it comes back to what society's prepared to accept. Let's go back to some basics. What's the strip search about? And let's put it in the context of what's currently in conversation, and that is music festivals, searching people who are suspected of being in possession of drugs. So if we just look at it from that perspective as a starting point, what are we as a society prepared to condone to seek to minimise, reduce criminal behaviour, i.e. supplying drugs, essentially? Because I don't think too many people care about the odd person here or there, or the person that carries a fairly small amount for their personal use. However, regrettably, I think the legislation or the police interpretation of the legislation, i.e. strip searching, is catching very predominantly, indeed 90 to 93% of the time, I think, of the stats, people that are in possession of drugs for personal use, not supply.
But are they catching people too? That's the point. Is this productive? Because for the time that it would take, you could go and put those resources to looking at a bikie gang who are, importing 40 tonnes of the stuff or something. You could really possibly put the resources to better use, couldn't you?
Yeah, good point. And that's a debate, I suppose, for the stats people, the people that sit down and look at where they can best allocate resources. But coming back to your question about, in effect, is it worthwhile? Is it productive? Is it constructive? It would seem on the evidence, no, because society, I don't think, would be condoning strip searching of anybody, let alone 16-year-old females asked to squat and reveal everything.
That was at the music festival
Yes.
up at Byron Bay, wasn't it? And
Yes.
that little girl was highly traumatised. What did the police do wrong there? Because there are allegations that they've broken every rule in the book about this strip searching, apparently.
Well, they did a number of things wrong. The first is that you could very reasonably argue that the search to begin with there wasn't a lawful basis to conduct the search. There has to be, police are supposed to have a reasonable suspicion based on reasonable grounds to conduct a search. And relevantly, that would be that let me say this, the common belief is, well, if a police officer suspects that the person might be in possession of drugs, that might be enough. Well, it might be, but it might not be. It just depends on the circumstance of the particular case. So a common misunderstanding is that just a suspicion that the person may be carrying a small amount of drugs for personal use may not be enough lawfully to conduct a strip search. It depends on a whole lot of other factors. Now, but in relation to that particular young lady, if we go past the strip search and whether the conducting of it was lawful or not, the next thing is there's nothing in the police manual, the police guidelines, as to the manner in which such a search is to be conducted. Yet this particular police officer that made this young lady squat down and got down and had a look underneath to see whether there's anything protruding, as she said, either from her vagina or from her anus. Sorry to put it bluntly as that, but that's what it was. She believed, the police officer believed, that the police guidelines specifically set out that is what she was entitled to do. It was established that was quite wrong. There's nothing in the manual, in the police guidelines, indicating the manner in which the search is to be conducted. So, again, you have a police officer that is doing this to a particular young lady in the mistaken belief that that is what she was directed to do by a police manual. The fact is it's not there.
What are our rights, Manny? What can we say to a police person or tell our children if they're catching the train to uni or something and the police come up with a dog or whatever and say, we're going to strip search you here at the station or in the toilets or something? What can they say? Can they say, could I please, I don't know, where do you go?
Well,
what do you do?
One has to be careful and let's just talk broadly. If your son or daughter is approached by a police officer, you're certainly entitled, or your son and the daughter is entitled to say to the police officer, in polite terms, not to be rude, not to be aggressive, excuse me, why are you doing this? They will say whatever the reason is, and the son or daughter can say, well, I can assure you, if it's the case, that I'm not carrying any drugs on me, or I'm not carrying a weapon, or whatever it is that the police officer is saying to them they're suspecting that they're doing wrong. They are certainly entitled to know why, if we're talking about a search, the police are asking for the person to be searched. All of that said, the son or daughter can be as reasonable as they can be, but if they happen to strike a particular officious police officer that is just determined to do what they're doing, whether that be conduct a search or whatever it may be.
And that raises question about some of those officers too, doesn't it? That there's some sort of gratuitous thrill they're getting out of doing this or something.
By all means, and let's not kid ourselves that it doesn't happen. It does. But coming back to what advice you would give your son and your daughter, don't resist. Just go along with it at that point in time, and then as soon as reasonably possible thereafter, they should seek legal advice about their position. Because one thing can lead to another, and it could be a circumstance where, to start with, the son and the daughter are perfectly in the right. They're perfectly entitled to question what is happening. But then it can go from that point to once the police officer says certain things, it can escalate to a point where the police officer might be entitled, depending on how that conversation is going, to place that person under arrest.
Well, they sometimes try to goad them into that reaction so they have cause for arrest, that they, all of a sudden the person gets... Because, of course, you would get upset and lose your cool because you don't want to be naked in front of a stranger. I would think, and I certainly haven't spent many years at the bar and arguing cases in court as you have, but you could say, why couldn't you say, look, I'm not happy with this. I want you, if you believe you should charge me with something, then go and do so, and I'll call my lawyer. And if you want a strip search, then I want a doctor present as well, and a witness present that I know, so on and so forth. But that's not a right. That's not within our rights.
No,
and go to the police station, and then if they've, because surely if you're going to strip search someone, you've got to have really strong grounds and some evidence to say that was warranted.
Well, coming back again to basics, under the current legislation, and there are reforms that have been promoted by the University of New South Wales, for example, have prepared a very detailed report putting forward some recommendations. And if I've got time, I'll come back to them shortly. Sure. But coming back to what the law permits police to do, and if they have a reasonable suspicion based on reasonable grounds that a person is in the process of committing some sort of an offence and keeping it relevant, if it's drugs or carrying a gun or whatever it is, then the law says they have an entitlement to search the person. So that's a starting point.
But if they thought someone was carrying a gun, that's a very serious crime.
Yes, but whether it's a gun or whether it's possession of drugs, it's still a crime, and the law doesn't distinguish between the two. Now, maybe it ought to, but as it is right now, it doesn't distinguish between the two. Whether they're carrying drugs of a small quantity or whether they're carrying a gun, indeed the recommendations are that it should distinguish, but right now it doesn't. So right now the police are entitled to, if they have this belief, this reasonable belief formed on reasonable grounds, to conduct a strip search. Having said that, and as I said earlier on, it's a bit more complicated than that when you get down to, if you're in a courtroom situation arguing whether the search was legal or illegal, it's more complicated than that. But stripping it back to its basics for present purposes, and again, what advice does a parent give the son or the daughter? It's, by all means, in a respectful way, insist on your right to say whatever it is you want to say. Question the police officer. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not consenting to this strip search. I think that should be absolutely said. And it shouldn't be done, and by all means give their reasons why it shouldn't be done. But, as I said before, if you have an officious police officer or just a police officer that is going to do it no matter what you say, then you need to then it should come to a point when you just desist from continuing and having a conversation that is A, going nowhere, and B, could lead to you being arrested, right?
Could be intimidating.
Well, and there are a number of points about that. Now, you said before, well, why can't the person just say, well, arrest me, take me to the police station, charge me? Well, again, that'll be a matter for the police officer at that point in time, depending on what the basis upon which they initially stopped the person. Did they see something more? Now, you're asking me this question presumably in the context of an innocent young person who hasn't done anything wrong. So in that context, all that the person can do is continue to insist on they haven't done anything wrong, not consent to the strip search, but if the police are going to insist on doing it, you don't want the position to escalate.
No, fair enough.
So that they can
You've
be
got to be
arrested.
Have the patience of Job. What have the University of New South Wales recommended to the government to change this situation? Because it's obviously, some of these cases highlight that it's not a good thing.
Yes, well, look, there are a number of recommendations, but just dealing with them in broad terms. Firstly, to understand, for the law to be clear on what a strip search is, because right now it isn't, as evidenced by the police officer giving evidence the other day in inquiry about what her understanding, what she could do and what she couldn't do. So it's not clear, even to police, it is not clear. So it needs to be clear as to what they can do. And the recommendation is that the strip search should be limited to a visual search only, not inspecting the cavities of individuals. And can I just pause there and make this point, and forgive me for running out of time, but I said at the beginning, it depends what we as a society are prepared to condone. If we thought that by strip searching we would reduce this in some meaningful way the supply of drugs to our children at festivals or other places, then society might say, well, yeah, let the odd persons be strip searched and have their cavities searched and so on and so forth. But the reality is, on the evidence, it is not doing that. All it is doing is catching 90% of the time plus. All it is doing is capturing those in possession of small amounts of prohibited drugs. So visual search only, not the genitals and so on, unless there is much more evidence upon which a stronger suspicion could be formed. So that is a very significant factor. Also to define the circumstances in which police can actually conduct a strip search, because right now it is very broad. And some of the suggestions are that it is not enough for a suspicion, however formed, that a person may be carrying an amount of drugs for their personal use. That should not form a basis upon which a strip search should be conducted. So they are two of the very significant areas.
All right. Manny Conditsis, thank you so much for joining us. And it's an area of the law that needs a bit of work by the sounds of it.
Indeed it does, Scott, like many other of our laws.
Good on you. Thanks for your time.
Cheers.